Lep pozdrav, moje ime je Rok Deželak, rad bi vas pozdravil v imenu piratov danes na današnjem dogodku. Dogodek smo imenovali Enotni digitalni trg. Organiziramo ga z razlogom, ker mislimo, da je v bistvu ta pomemben del zakonodajnega okvira strani EU-ja bo še kako pomemben v prihodnosti, kar se tiče ne samo regulacije, kako naj bi internet izgledal, ampak kakšne dejanske vplive bo imela ta zakonodaja na naše vsakdanje življenje. Torej, rad bi najprej pozdravil vse paneliste, pa predstavil tudi naše goste v tem smislu. So, thank you very much for coming on this panel. I would like to introduce Maja, who will be our moderator for the evening. Maja is very well known in Slovenia for her work at the Creative Commons and legislative practices regarding copyright and so on. So I'm more than happy to have her running this panel because I know that this is the best person to do it so. So thank you very much again, and I'm leaving it up to you, Maja. Thank you.
Rob, thank you very much for this straightforward introduction. Let's say that. It's always nice to hear that you're good at some things. Sorry, my mom is not here, but anyway. My introduction for the beginning. I will first introduce my guests. I'm really proud that I have this panel of distinguished guests that are really top experts on the area that will be presented today. And I asked themselves to send me a couple of lines about themselves, so I will actually try to follow what was received. And I'll be a bit longer in this, and later I will have some more straightforward questions. So first, Julia Reda. She's the youngest member of the European Parliament and, of course, the member of the German Pirate Party. She's representing a young worldwide movement of people who believe in using technology for the empowerment of all. I really like that. And she's a vice chair of the Greens EFA group and co-founder of Parliament's Digital Agenda Intergroup. As a shadow rapporteur, right, in the European Parliament for the review of the 2001 Copyright Directive, she was called Angela Merkel of Pirate Party. She didn't send me that, but she presented the 24 points of how the future balanced copyright should look like, and nobody really liked the report. Not Pirate Party and not more conservative parties. And that was, for me, warranty that something is really good in that report. We'll see later whether the European Commission follows the agenda that Julia proposed. That was later a little bit amended, but still was quite a balanced proposal how to move forward with the copyright reform. I warned the members of my panel that I myself could easily talk about that topic for next 20 hours, but we will try to cover some other important topics on the digital single market. Julia holds a Master of Art in Political Science and Communication Science from the Johannes Gutenberg University Mainz in Germany. The next on my panel is Mattias Bjärnemalm. He's advisor for the digital policy for the Greens and EFA group in the European Parliament since 2014. And before that, he was working as a head office of the Member of Parliament, Amelia Andersdotter. We hosted her in Slovenia as well, but also we read a lot what she was achieving and was trying to achieve in the European Parliament. Mattias has a background in political science and has followed European policy in digital sphere for the last 8 years in different capacities. So you will be a very good source of what is going on with all these policies. He's a former board member of the Swedish Pirate Party, and of course he's still an active member of this party, and his main focus is on intellectual property rights, digital rights, and internet governance, and all these pressing issues. Dušan Caf is the next member of this panel. He's currently Executive Director of Digital Institute, which is a private research institute dealing with interdisciplinary aspects in digital society. Before, Dr. Dušan Caf was a lecturer at the Faculty of Information Science and Applied Social Studies in Slovenia and fellow at Jožef Stefan Institute, and also like visiting researcher at Loughborough University. He is a member of the steering committee and in the Slovenian Internet Governance Forum, and he has been active in this area, what his gray hair says, for more than 2 decades now. So a good source of what information of what is going on in Europe, and also like what is going on in Slovenia as a member country of the European Union, whether we are following the situation or we are just copy, translating, pasting legislation that is being enacted in the European Union. My next guest here is Marko Grobelnik, digital champion, or in Slovenian that would be glasnik za digitalno tehnologijo. I was trying to translate glasnik for digitalno tehnologijo myself, but then I googled it, and so champion. Of course, researcher at Institute of Jožef Stefan, and director and founder of the company Quintelligence. And Marko and Tilen, that I will present later, they will be presenting also entrepreneur side of issues that we'll debate, but of course your first role here today is as a digital champion. So Marko has extensive expertise from the area of data mining, machine learning, text mining, data analytics, networks analytics, and so on and so on. And so you will definitely highlight some of your expertise while we will do all this today. And the last and not least is Tilen Travnik. His presentation was really short, and I will just read it. He said, "People tell me I'm good at figuring out why teams do not perform as expected, or why an internet product does not make sense. Dealing with startups and corporations in the digital transformation phase, this helped me get my job done. I co-founded D-Labs, where we help entrepreneurs research, design, and build new businesses. I'm a mentor at Initiative Startup Slovenia and an angel investor as a hobby." Tilen also says, "3 kids and a wife, make sure I do not take work home." He's lucky. So this is going to be the panel, and the panel is about digital single market. What is digital single market? Why is digital single market important? Why legislators try to do and introduce some legislative measures that would change or establish, for the beginning, digital single market? Let's start with that. Mattias, you promised me that you will explain to the audience some basics about these issues that we will frame today's debate.
Yeah, if I'm going to go in details on the digital single market, that would be the 2 hours and we would still not be done. But very briefly, the previous Commission launched the Digital Agenda for Europe, which was all the digital topics they had in one basket that they wanted to push for during the last mandate. So that was up until 2014. And then with a new Commission, they need a new name for the same thing. So they made a new package and called it the Digital Single Market. So that is basically the basket of digital files that the current Commission has put forward, or will put forward. Everything hasn't been presented to the co-legislators yet. And, well, the digital agenda was fairly broad. The digital single market is broader. I had to make a cheat sheet to actually make sure I don't miss anything. So it's very simple. It's 3 pillars. So if you remember those, you will remember the digital single market strategy. But then, of course, within every pillar, there's tons of different legislative proposals. So the first pillar is better access for consumers to online goods. Within that category, you have an oversight of the e-commerce directive. You have new parcel delivery, cross-border parcel delivery, so that you can deliver parcels from one country to another. You have the geo-blocking proposal, which is both me and Julia has worked quite extensively with, so we can go in details there if you want. You have the copyright directive, which has been proposed, which is currently, I think, well, there's a lot of us here who would probably be happy to talk a lot about that. You have the little side directive of satellite and cable directive, which is an oversight of an old directive regulating public broadcasters, or sorry, broadcasters in general. And then you have an idea of kind of harmonizing VAT in online sales. And then you have the legislation on digital contracts and online sales of goods. That all goes in that pillar. So that was 1 out of 3. The second would be to create the right environment for digital networks and services. And here we have an oversight of the telecom rules, which is a follow-up on the telecom single market, which have been called Connected Continent and tons of different things. It's basically harmonization of telecoms rules. And you also have the Audiovisual Media Services Directive that we've worked with in the Parliament quite recently, which is expanding basically the rules for TV channels and broadcasters also to online platforms, such as YouTube most likely. And it might also creep into social media, depending on exactly how the legislation ends up. You have an oversight of platforms. You have the General Data Protection Regulation, which the Parliament, well, is done, so it's taking effect next year. But to build on that, you have a review of the, or actually a replacement of the e-privacy directive with an e-privacy regulation. And then you have a collaboration with the industry on cybersecurity. That's the second pillar. And the third one they call e-commerce and, economy and society. And there you have free flow of data initiative, and you have a cloud initiative. You have standards and operability, and you have e-skills and e-government proposals. So these are all different legislative proposals that together create the digital single market. And there's no one, not in this panel or anyone, who is an expert on the digital single market. I mean, there's just too many things in there for anyone to follow. So I think what we will see is we will probably go down into some of the files and topics more deeply, I think.
Thank you for this framing and also like highlighting that nobody's really can handle all of this because it's such a broad topic. One of the topics is copyright. And also like to comprehend that topic as well, it's quite challenging because it's really broad. And the European Union last September 14, published quite a comprehensive proposal, which was not just the copyright directive on digital single market, but it was also 2 instruments that would help to implement Marrakesh Treaty, which is the international convention that would finally legislate on the exception for visually impaired person. And then it was also like one on regulation that would change satellite and cable directive, which is like broadband regulation. Only on this small topic of digital single market, quite very comprehensive for actually 5 legal instruments. And also the directive itself, which I want to talk right now, it's very short, but like it has less than 20 articles. But not even experts would be able to focus on that very different topics that they challenge. I myself say that users and probably also others or copyright holders would like different copyright. If we, like I said, we would like fast bike, very effective plane, very environmentally friendly train, but what we got is a very old car that really pollutes the environment. Julia, what do you think about the copyright directive? What do you think about proposal? Did they follow your advice that you were able to put on the table as a repertoire back in 2001? Back in 2000, much later, actually.
Yes. So, first of all, the reason why copyright is part of this broader digital single market strategy is because the goal of the digital single market is supposed to be to remove borders between different European countries on the internet. And I think copyright law is probably the area where it's most apparent in day-to-day life that there are these borders. So if you have ever seen the message, this video is not available in your country, there is a good chance that it has something to do with copyright law. There can be other reasons as well, which are also dealt with in the digital single market, but it's very clear that copyright law is one of the areas of the law that is really not adapted to the borderless nature of the internet. Every single country in the EU has its own copyright law, and they are based on European legislation from 2001, which was, of course, before a lot of the digital revolution that we are now familiar with happened. Like in 2001, you didn't have any smartphones, you didn't have Facebook, Wikipedia was just starting out, so the internet environment was very different. And these are still the rules for copyright that are in place today. And you can see in a lot of places that this is not working very well. One of the areas that where we do not have European rules is the exceptions to copyright. So whenever there is a public interest reason why you are allowed to use certain copyrighted works, for example, for education, for research, because you have a disability, and all kinds of other reasons, criticism, quotation, parody, and so on. And the problem is that every country in the EU has different rules for this. So, for example, in France, you can only quote from text, but you cannot quote from a video. In Germany, you can quote from a video, but only if you are criticizing it in some way. So these are the kinds of rules that theoretically every person who puts videos on the internet would have to know. But of course, in reality, we don't. People grow up with the possibility to make their own videos, make their own music, to create different things and share them with each other. And the laws are not adapted to this. So when I was elected to the European Parliament, quite to my surprise, the Parliament made me draft a report on what this copyright reform in the digital single market should look like. And I made a few recommendations that all go in the direction of abolishing borders, abolishing geo-blocking, and making the copyright law more European and making the existing exceptions to copyright mandatory for all the countries. Now, has the Commission followed these proposals? To a very small extent, I would say. On the one hand, on geo-blocking, what has basically happened is that a law has been introduced and was also passed this week that allows people who already have a subscription in their home country to also use this when they're traveling around. So, for example, somebody who has a legal Netflix subscription in their own country, when they go on holiday, they can still access it. But if there is no Netflix in your country, or if you want to access specific films that are not offered in your country, then this regulation is not going to help you. So in this respect, I think we need actually more steps to make sure that geo-blocking is actually abolished. On the copyright exceptions, also, initially the Commission said we're going to make it much easier, we're going to make it European, and in the end they have proposed a very limited number of exceptions that would be made mandatory. One you already mentioned, the Marrakesh Treaty, but this is really something that should be a matter of course. It's legislation that allows organizations catering to blind people to give them access to books in accessible formats and to exchange them with each other, because most of the books on the market are simply not available in formats that are accessible to blind people. There is another one for text and data mining that I'm sure we're going to talk about, one for illustration for teaching, one for copies that libraries make, but this is more or less it. So there is nothing really to legalize all the kind of creative activity that is going on in the internet. There is nothing on remixing. There is nothing to kind of create European standards for what you are allowed to do as a parody and so on. So I think in that regard, the proposal is quite disappointing. At the same time, it introduces some new proposals that I think would actually create new barriers to the digital single market, new national borders. And there are two proposals in particular. One is the introduction of a new special layer of copyright protection for newspaper articles. We already have this in Germany. The basic idea is that publishers have been, or certain publishers have been complaining that Google and Facebook are showing small parts of their newspaper articles, so the headline and the little picture, and they want to be paid for this. In Germany, we introduced a new protection for these very small parts of news articles, and the result was that Google would simply no longer show them. And
do you think that Google will switch off Europe?
I don't think they will switch off their service, but they're never going to pay for showing a headline of a newspaper article. And I don't think they should, because actually, even under international law, even under the Berne Convention, it is said that simple news of the day should not be covered by copyright protection. It should really be creative content and not something like, I don't know, a single sentence.
So Julia is talking about a new ancillary or neighboring right for the owners in copyright in the news, in the old media. Let's put it this way, although it's not very clear what this old media is really. Okay, this is targeted sort of to Google, but what will have the influence, for example, for a library that will put these articles online? Can we see the future that not just this movie is not accessible to you, but maybe also that this link is not accessible to you? Do you see this future in Europe?
Well, I hope that this proposal is not going to pass, because it raises a lot of questions about how we share information on the internet today. It can be a problem for a library that is having an online archive or online overview of the different content it holds. It can also be a problem for individual users who maybe have a website where they collect articles that have been written about themselves. And I think the problem with this proposal and with a number of others is that they're introduced to please one particular industry, but they are formulated in a very general manner, and they would actually have a lot of side effects. And the other proposal that goes in a similar direction would force online intermediaries, so hosting providers, to put in place filtering technology to take down...
Didn't we read about something like that when we discussed about ACTA years ago?
It's similar in a way, that basically it's mostly the music industry that is asking for this, and it's kind of the elephant in the room is YouTube. Everybody knows that this proposal about content filters is because the music industry and YouTube can't agree on a business model that works for both sides. But of course the problem is that copyright does not just apply to music, and it does not just apply to YouTube, and they're proposing a very general law that might force other websites to introduce filters, such as Wikipedia or GitHub, and it really doesn't make any sense at all.
So new ancillary right, new mandatory obligation for the internet service provider to do something to install these sort of obligations that's already there, according to some positions. It's written in this article, very vague article. Nobody who is a lawyer could be happy with sort of vague language. We don't know what will be there. So when at time of ACTA we talked about voluntary measures, something. Now we are reading about more specific proposals. This is all changing landscape of internet in Europe. Marko, you as digital champion, do you follow, do you think that has somebody approached you with fear or with alarm that something really big is going on in Europe and that Slovenia should be very careful about it?
Yeah, I'm approached every week with lots of fears of digitalization. A typical topic for me to speak on these roundtables or even the Commission or now in Malta and so on is fears of digitalization, so this digital transformation. So copyright is not as much the issue, it's more like...
So nobody approached to you with like specific topic that right now we're talking about this copyright reform, members' countries are like forming their own position and that we would really need to be...
With copyright issues, not really. So typically the topics which I'm covering or which I'm being asked at least is on one side jobs, right? Fear of losing jobs, this is one topic, and the second topic is this text and data mining, analytics, right? So what one can do with these extra technologies, which is, well, it looks like a magic, right, from the outside, but it's more like one needs to understand it, right? So these are two sides which are usually the topic of the discussions.
Text and data mining, before we will try to list everything what is in this directive, at least we'll try to. Text and data mining exception is also there. And on one side, it's great that it's there because research organizations were asking for that. But not only research organizations, but also businesses. But businesses are left out. Businesses are left out. Matthias, do you think that some of the businesses that are doing now text and data mining in Europe will move and go across the Atlantic or somewhere else?
Well, I think it all depends on where the legislation ends up. So a lot of businesses that are doing text and data mining now do it because it's a legal gray zone. So it's not explicitly allowed and it's not explicitly forbidden. And the problem with putting it in the copyright legislation is that if we word it wrong, it might be construed that everything that isn't allowed will be forbidden, and then it would cause a problem for European businesses that do text and data mining. So the easiest solution to that is, of course, to have a clear text in the legislation saying that the text and data mining exception only touch the copyright aspect of text and data mining and not text and data mining in general, and also, for even more certainty, to include businesses in that exception, which is, I mean, it's perfectly doable if we just adapt the law a little bit for that purpose. And I think if we want to have a better business sector in text and data mining in Europe, we need that change in the law. The other aspects of text and data mining is, of course, the data protection aspect when it comes to personal data. And there, I think the General Data Protection Regulation has set clear definitions of how you can use personal data when it comes to text and data mining.
So from the copyright, we jumped back to the more general issues. So comment on privacy in text and data mining.
Privacy in text and data mining. So one issue which is my typical, since my area is artificial intelligence, and we basically, I'm doing this for the last 30 years, right? So one thing which it's more than clear, right, is that legislators are lagging behind technology so much that technologies are really laughing at legislators. So this is the reality. I mean, if we say that something different, then it's not true. Yeah. Why? First, because, you know, something which was there like 2-3 years ago, legislators are not even aware that it happened. You know, they're hardly aware what was a couple of years ago. In the meantime, things progressed so much that it's really hard to discuss. You know, to have proper competent discussion. This is one thing. Second thing, if privacy, yeah, this is something which I'm more than aware of all the troubles or the dangers and so on. On the other side, I see what's possible in US, right? So we can close our borders, but basically there's a whole privacy market of private data, which is going on in US. This market doesn't have any borders. In principle, I can buy data about you, no problem, or about you, and I see everything, maybe except your name. I know what you do, where you walk, what you do, which coffee you drink, what you read, what you write, where you pay, what's your net worth, what's your debt. I can buy for a small amount of money this data in US. So now, what's now reality on one side and legislators on the other side? So we can close our borders still. US will do this and the rest of the world. So I just want to contrast reality and what maybe this legislation would like to do. So if we want to blind ourselves, okay, no problem, but this is not something which I made up, right? So I'm doing this every day.
No, my point was, if the European Union, as Julia said at the beginning, wants to do digital single market, to erase borders, that it would be more fluid, more harmonized, more effective on the end of the day, whether this is a good direction in the area of text and data
It's too slow.
mining.
It's way too slow.
I agree.
It's way too slow, and you most likely you lack competent technical people, which, I mean, this is for sure. I mean, I know these circles to some degree, right? And it's just not matching the reality. So this is my quick comment.
Not matching the reality, but maybe shaping reality in the future?
Maybe in Europe, but not in the rest of the world.
Okay, we're talking about the digital single market in Europe and why this is problematic. It's a very relevant, very important point. Mattias.
Well, I think you have a valid point. I mean, there is a risk of digital fragmentation where different parts of the world develop the internet in different directions, and we don't have one internet. We have plenty different internets. One example of that recently would be the AVMS, which will create sub-internets within Europe if we're really unlucky. But I think what we see is at least a trend towards European harmonization, and I agree that it's too slow. I don't think we lack the technical competence, but it's a common practice that there's a technical understanding of what needs to be done, and then there's a political understanding of what can be done. So the way Europe is structured, when we have a lot of different member states with different industry, different interests, there will always be someone slowing down the process. And that is why we're moving with the slowest pace of any country in Europe in any single topic within the digital single market. And that just takes a lot of time. And I don't think that is something that will change. I mean, the digital single market strategy will be outdated whenever it's done. And then the next commission will propose a new package with another name that will solve all the problems. But to some extent, this is legislation. It goes very slow. It changes things gradually. And I think it's, at the end of the day, it's the best possible way forward, because drastic changes in legislation tend to have unforeseen consequences. But it also means that we will never be done with talking about these topics. As long as we're in the middle of the whole digital transformation, we will constantly discuss how this affects legislation, and legislation will then fall behind and have to be reformed probably over and over again. The positive thing with that is that we will have endless opportunities for these kinds of panels, because this is something that will take our lifetime.
So ancillary right for copyright owners in news articles, new obligation to monitor for internet service providers, text and data mining exception. What else is in the directive that we really need to highlight today? Julia.
Well, I think we've mostly spoken about the problems. I mean, there are some good elements in the directive, at least in the sense that it is trying to make life for universities and schools a bit easier, in the sense that it's trying to put in place copyright rules that allow teachers and professors to basically use copyrighted material in the classroom, in online lectures, in kind of repositories where students can access them. And I think this is really overdue. I'm not exactly sure what the situation is like in Slovenia. I know that Germany has one of the worst copyright systems for education in the world, where it's really basically teachers and professors have the choice either to ignore the law or to just use analog means, because anything to do with the internet, with digital tools, is incredibly complicated and most likely will be in violation of the law.
Like educators, I'll chip in because I especially focus on the copyright reform in education. Educators all around need more clear and more simpler copyright system when they go into the classroom, that they can use technologies that are a fact today also in the process of teaching. And it's huge, this harmonization in Europe. What teachers in Poland or, for example, in Estonia, one of the most liberal system, can do in classroom, teachers from Spain or Germany or Slovenia can't really do. So we would need modernized, more balanced copyright approach. And directive addresses this issue in a really bad manner. So it's not really the good thing in this directive. Wow, it's great that Commission is finally doing something on this area, but is it really good that we get something bad? The title of the Article 4, which deals with that, is cross-border. It's cross-border in the title, but nowhere else in the text of the directive. So it excludes other educational institutions that are not public, and also it only regulates the exception for illustrative purposes in teaching, and only on the premises of the school or in the closed intranet. So it's not really something that the teachers need or the pupils need for today. The question is also whether this new directive, if we have liberal law under the basis of old directive, and this new directive brings something worse, will this influence the legal situation, for example, in Estonia?
I think formally it doesn't. So the situation that we have today is that the EU does not tell you which exceptions to copyright you have to have. It just tells you which you're allowed to have. And then it's up to every single member state to pick and choose from this list and to implement it. And so if Estonia has a very permissive general education exception, they can keep that. I don't think that this new directive puts this in question at all. The only thing it does, it says this is what you have to have for the purposes of illustration for teaching because of this cross-border element. So basically, if not all countries in the EU have at least this minimum standard, then there can be no cross-border application of this exception. And I think having a cross-border teaching exception is extremely important because increasingly, if people are using the internet for education, there is no reason to limit these offers to a particular country. So for example, in Germany, we have some universities that are distance learning universities who have a lot of students who live in Austria. And if we don't have exceptions that apply across borders, then Austrian students would not even be allowed to access the content that has been legally made available under the German exception. And this is really crazy. Even if you have different countries that allow certain things, you need the European rules to make sure that they don't stop at the borders. Now, I completely agree with you that the exception for teaching that is proposed now is completely insufficient, and especially this rule about closed intranets is crazy. I mean, I think students need to be able to use the internet in order to kind of access reading materials or to watch streams of lectures and so on. But at least I think it establishes a minimum standards of what every country in the EU has to have.
Okay. What's left from the directive is freedom of panorama. And it was huge discussion at the time when you were drafting the report. The silence that this is not in the directive is quite striking. For me, the discussion about freedom panorama made one additional point of view, that there are so many, much more important issues in the copyright law, but so much was talked about freedom of panorama. Why? My opinion was because this was easily to comprehend or to understand for the people who are actually making politics. And the other point, that this was really good tool to highlight how not balanced, how not harmonized the law is currently in the European Union. So can you comment why this is missing and what was the debate at that time about that issue?
Yeah, so even though it was discussed quite a lot in the media a year ago, I'm not sure everybody knows what freedom of panorama means. So basically, it's one of the exceptions to copyright, which deals with photographies of public buildings and artworks. Because the basic rule of copyright is if you have a work that is a work of art, any reproduction, including photographies, requires a permission. But of course, you have a lot of artworks that are standing in public places. Even a building can be a work of art. And so if there weren't any exceptions to copyright, you would be creating a copyright infringement every time you're taking a picture. And this is obviously absurd because, you know, people take holiday pictures. You have to be able to use the public space that you live in. And this is why almost every country in the EU has some kind of freedom of panorama exception. But some of them do not. And mostly the problem is just ignored, but it creates, of course, problems for projects that are trying to really follow the law exactly. So, for example, Wikipedia can't show pictures of public buildings in certain countries. And so there was a lot of protest against that because it's so obvious that this is crazy. I think this is the reason. It's not because it's the biggest problem in the world. It's simply because everybody understands that it's absurd if you can take a picture of the Eiffel Tower during the day, but not at night, because the light show that lights up the Eiffel Tower is protected by copyright. And I think this is the reason why it became such a big subject. The European Commission then kind of asked people whether they think that freedom of panorama should apply in the entire EU, and people overwhelmingly said yes, and then they decided not to do anything. And the reason for that is mostly because one country, in this case France, didn't want anything to be done. And this is what Mattias was pointing out. The problem is often not that people don't know what should be done or that there is a lack of technical understanding, but that there are political reasons, often coming from one or two of the most powerful member states, that are blocking the progress that is needed. And I think that's one of the biggest problems that we have in Europe today, that even when everybody agrees, like there's complete academic consensus that the neighboring right for publishers is bad and that mandatory content filters would be a terrible idea, yet we're discussing it anyway because it's politically expedient for certain countries.
Mattias, who are these countries that are pressing for this agenda? Which countries?
Well, it depends on which topic. So if you go to the surveillance topic, you might have the UK pressing for more online surveillance. If you go to freedom of panorama, it's obviously France. If you go for the neighboring rights for press publishers, well, then the German industry is very strong. So it all depends, and there will always be one country, generally with a big industry in that field, that will push for it. And the problem here is that those negotiations are mainly in the European Council, so those are not in the Parliament. Julia will not be able to affect those discussions. I mean, indirectly, but not directly.
What does this mean, that negotiations are in the European Council? Can you explain to the public who is sitting there and who is negotiating?
So it's very simple. The law in the EU legislation is done in parallel in the European Parliament and in the European Council. In the European Parliament, you have the parliamentarians that are directly elected, and they have a fairly transparent political process to come to a position. In the Council, you have representations from the member states. At the highest level, that would be ministers, but normally it's people working in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, in the permanent representation in the EU. So civil servants working for the government who negotiate internally, and then the political questions go to minister level, and then they come to a position. And then after that, the Parliament and the Council negotiate for a joint position that will eventually end up being the law passed. And that means that the Parliament discussion is easy to access, it's easy to follow for civil society and also for industry and everyone else. The Council discussions are way more tricky. But the best way to access them is in the member states. So if you want to affect European legislation, you need a discussion with your ministers, with your government. They are the ones who sit in the Council and discuss at the end of the day. And there is a tendency for smaller countries to be bullied by the big countries, especially if there's no debate in their member state, because then they will not take the fight for an issue they don't think their citizens care about. But if you raise awareness in your country about a topic, then you will get your government to push for that, hopefully, in the council and push back against the one or two bigger countries that might have an industry that benefit from special legislation.
Julia, do you have some information from some sort of report from, actually, a report from the Austrian presidents about the position of Slovenia?
The only thing I know about the position of Slovenia in the Council is that they are opposing the neighboring right for press publishers, which I think is very good. They have asked a lot of questions about, first of all, they have questioned that this new law would actually help quality journalism, which is what is always being said by the large publishers. We need this right to make Google pay some of its revenues to the publishers, and then this money will be used to fund quality journalism. And we know from Germany and Spain, where these laws exist, that journalists have not earned any money, and actually even the publishers have not earned any money from this. They have actually lost money in court cases. And so the Slovenian government, as far as I know, is asking a lot of very intelligent questions about this, like how is it supposed to work, how are journalists supposed to benefit from this, what is it actually that this law is supposed to protect, because news articles are already protected by copyright. And so I think in that respect, at least for this point, I think the Slovenian government is doing a good job, but we have the problem that we do not know exactly what our governments are saying in the council. I hear this kind of from sometimes from the German government or from the Austrian government, who are sending reports about what is going on in council back to the parliaments, but the public access to this information is very, very limited. And I think that's a problem, because the Slovenian government is supposed to represent all of you, and yet it's very difficult to find out what they are saying.
How many more meetings will take place?
I don't know.
Nobody knows, really.
Well, I mean, sure,
so it's still
somebody
time.
knows.
Still time to get involved, still time to get answers, still time to ask the government what's the position about that article, what's the position about text and data mining, what's the position about education and things like that.
Yes, absolutely. So it's definitely the right time now to get in touch with your ministry and to ask them what is their position on the different parts of the legislation. The European Parliament is supposed to vote on the proposal, or at least the committee responsible, at the end of September, and I don't expect that the Council is going to be done much earlier. So it's really going to be the next few months where these decisions are being made, and I think it's definitely worth looking at what is your government doing in the Council. Maybe they are fighting the good fight, like on net neutrality. I'm sure Slovenia was one of the good countries on this, or maybe they're not doing anything, and so it's important to find out.
So it's still time, and who is doing that in Slovenia? It's Ministry for Commerce, Ministrstvo za gospodarstvo is responsible, and Urad za intelektualno lastnino is leading, they organized 2 public debates, but well, we have email of the Copyright Office in Slovenia, so it's still time to do something. And there also some petitions are taking place European-wide. One of them is a petition for sound right copyright in education. It will go on until the end of this month, so go and check. We used so much time for the copyright, and we are probably not over, but there are some other very important issues regarding digital single market. Dušan, you are involved in several areas that are covered by digital single market strategy, which would be, you will probably talk about net neutrality, of course. We want that you represent to us what's the state of affair in that area, what's going on, and what's the position of Slovenia. Before that, any other topics that you would really like to highlight and to present to the audience today?
Well, on the one hand, we have the aim of this digital single market to open up opportunities for citizens and businesses. But as we heard before, we have a problem with gradual progress and with countries who oppose the progress. So what we witnessed last year was that it was very difficult to come up with a solution that would benefit all citizens, all European citizens, as countries like the Netherlands and Slovenia were quite advanced, but after adopting the regulation, the telecom single market regulation, we came up with a worse solution. And now we saw that what happened in the Netherlands was that the legislator last year adopted a stronger law, but it was turned down by the court this year. I mean, in May or April, I think. And that's very bad. And we see this also in other areas, like in Rome, like at home. I mean, it is a good idea. Several countries would benefit from that, but several, like the Baltic states and the Nordic states, would not benefit because they would roam at worse condition than other countries. And that you see how absurd the situation is enough to go to Switzerland, and then you can learn how cheap actually the calling, I mean how low the costs are in the EU, and how expensive the calls are for you if you go to Switzerland or to Bosnia and Herzegovina or to Russia. I mean, you may pay thousands of euros for 1 gigabyte. I mean, that's really a lot. But that's the result of these lobbies that are behind and that slow down the progress of the digital single market. So if we are talking about the opportunities, the question is who will really benefit from this development if it is slower than it should be. We saw that it is quite difficult to influence the process of adopting the legislation. In the first reading in the Parliament, the Telecom Single Market Directive was very good. It was improved by the Parliament. But then what happened was it was again changed completely around by the Council. I mean, in the negotiations between the Council, the Commission, and the Parliament. And what we got then was really a compromise, which was not very good. And that is happening in all areas, and that's one of the problems. So we are trying to influence the implementation back home, but also to influence the development in the institutions of the European Union. But it's difficult because we don't have, I mean, in Europe, we don't have enough resources for civil society organizations to get involved in these dialogues. And to influence the political process.
The transparency of the whole system in Europe, is it a really huge problem?
Sorry?
The transparency of a lobbying system in Europe, and not talking only about a process in Parliament, but especially the process at the European Council. Is it a huge problem? It's a rhetorical question.
Well, we heard before that Julia mentioned that the process in the Parliament is quite transparent, but there are also other circles where you should let's say, get involved and influence the process, but it's quite difficult because the Council is actually the one that can change the legislation heavily, and it is lobbied by the industry through member states. We saw that also in Slovenia in the case of the telecom single market. So the government would say that the negotiations are secret and wouldn't reveal any information, but on the other side, it would get in touch with the industry and would probably bring forward their interests into the negotiation process. That's probably one of the problems for the civil society and for the citizens. And that's also why the whole process is probably slower than we would like to be. So in the case of net neutrality, we also see that the legislation and regulation is also quite ideological. Also now we can see that in the United States, with the change in the FCC, the net neutrality rules are going to be changed probably back to the old regulation, and the problem with the digital single market is in Europe that if we don't have open internet, then it is really difficult to benefit for citizens and for businesses. We need open internet in order to innovate, but if we allow such rules as we now have in Europe, then we may come up with operators like in the Netherlands that would, for example, sell some or give you some services for free, and you would have to pay for other services like, I don't know, Google, I think. And that's not really a good idea, because you hinder innovation by doing that. And we have to fight all the time for better rules, I think.
Marko, how can you, as a digital champion, help in this fight?
You mean net neutrality or some other issues?
For better rules in digital single market in general, and maybe for net neutrality specifically.
Well, you see, so why we need this digital single market, right? So this is like, there's no question why we need road system and water system, because this is enabler so that we can reach something bigger, higher, and so on. So digital single market basically is just an extension of this infrastructure in which we live. And this is reality which became obvious like in the last, 20 years, I guess, after end of 80s was kind of, for us researchers, was kind of clear. End of 90s, this web appeared, and then towards end of 90s somehow, big businesses, Google was not even there yet, right? But in the last 15 years, somehow it's more than clear that this is kind of another layer of economy. And why this economy is relevant? Because it just removes friction from the economy which we know from the old times, right? So it's way more efficient, fluent, and so on. So that's why we need it, right? Now, net neutrality is exactly the mechanism why we don't have, in the medieval times, right? So apparently there were tolls on every end, right? So you wanted to cross the bridge, right? There was a toll, right? And so on. So now, at some point, seems like, right, so these tolls were removed because economy kind of recognized the need that at least people need to move, otherwise economy cannot function. Now, net neutrality is exactly like removing, actually the web started without tolls, right? So now, then there was this, how it's called, internet is a set of small walled gardens, right? So, I mean, Facebook, Twitter, others were already danger to this neutrality in a way, and they still are in some way. Now, removing these barriers, of course, would, or not introducing them in a way, right, would actually allow bringing up all these other layers which are there. Now, I'm just answering now the question why we need this at all, right? So now, awareness of now either businesses or governments need to be along these lines. If this vision is not there, then maybe it's better that we introduce a period of dark ages, right? So where we close everything, and then for sure there will be a need for to reopen everything sooner or later, because somebody else will overtake us heavily in the next, I don't know, few years. Yeah? But this is just the bad scenario, right? A bit of a joke. Now, how to approach it? I'm sitting on some bodies, not too many, I guess. I understand commercial interest on one side, so just to earn as much money as possible. On the other side, I don't know, talking to W3C people, for instance, Tim Berners-Lee and so on, which is a proponent of this net neutrality and so on, and has some voice, right? He doesn't have power, but has some voice. It's unclear. My feeling now, observing this area for maybe 20 more years, right? So it's kind of swinging, you know.
But does sometimes Marko entrepreneur and Marko researcher has different opinion as Marko digital champion? And how do you balance that?
Marko as researcher, you know, this is not just Marko as researcher, we all researchers, we just take. When we are not afraid because nobody can sue us. This is reality of all researchers in computer science, AI, all over the world. We just take.
But I've been sitting in Hague a couple of years ago drafting Hague Declaration. It was full of lawyers, researchers, and people from all around the world. And there were also researchers who were saying, we are afraid. We don't know whether we are doing something legal or illegal. And they were not like some, maybe they were not computer engineer, but they were chemists, there were doctor of medicines who were doing text and data mining and were complaining about the law and
so the difference between American researchers, Slovenian researcher, or German researcher would be that we would do all the same thing, except German researcher would say, okay, I might go to jail. He doesn't go to jail at the end, but he's kind of morally, he needs, they want to follow, although we are all sinners of the same kind, right? This is on you ask me as a researcher, so for researchers, you cannot compete, you know. At the end, reality is if you want to work in data and text mining, you need to have access to data, otherwise there's no data mining, right? And usually this means either you take from the web or you have deal with some of the big data providers, including Google and others, right? Or we work with Bloomberg a lot, and so there's no data mining without data, right? So you need to get this data somewhere. That's the fact, but the fact is also that the current legal system, it's really difficult and legally uncertain. So we are, and it frames the digital single market. And if the legal system is not okay, it will probably shape the future. So although like a broad group of researchers who need to dare to research and do, still need to be a little bit afraid and to give back in a way to alarm and to highlight the problems of if the legal system is not okay. Again, going back to this, my first statement, so things are happening so fast, right? So simply we as researchers and even as a companies, we have no time to wait, right? So in 2-3 years, you can disappear from the market and then basically there's no discussion anymore. So this is reality. So just today in the morning, I had the same discussion on FP9, so the future of European research, right? It was also nice words, discussion. Everybody's forgetting speed of reaction, you know. If you don't react fast enough, you're wiped out. Or you need to get employed with Google or Facebook or one of the big guys, which want us, right? Even they want to pay us. It's just that we would be then walled within this big company. This is reality of researchers in computer science, data, text mining, and so on.
I'm happy to learn that you are so quick and that you are so fast and you're not afraid of future.
And we are in shady areas all the time.
I've attended the celebration of 25th year of IVIR, which is Information Institute in Amsterdam. And there was an excellent lecture of James Doyle, who is an American professor, but he was explaining that now and then the generations face this dilemma how to shape certain copyright area. And if like 10 years ago or 15 years ago, there would be contributory liability in copyright, for example, that was huge debate, secondary liability. If the law would be said differently, today we would not have Facebook, we would not have all these different kind of digital companies that are definitely shaping our today's life and probably the future. So the legal system has huge influence on researchers and also on the companies. And now I will jump here to Tilen, who is like, we are talking about law, politics, and we have like a representative on entrepreneurship sitting here, and we are not even asking him a question.
It's fine. We're used to
is
that.
This is this diagnostic?
I must say, entrepreneurs are really used for not being asked anything by the politicians.
And also like, but not that. Okay, we have politicians here as well, but is it also symptomatic that you as a business, you don't jump in with the question? You are happy that you're there and that you're just like, well, feeling that this is not of
I
your
would
business?
say it's a combination of what Marko said and that. So basically, speed is of utmost importance, and you need to react fast. I would say that all these laws being passed in one or another way, if I look at the three groups, right? If I look at it, entrepreneurs, at consumers, and let's call it not the government, like the society, right? The entrepreneurs will be the best off regardless of the outcomes, right? Because a real, ambitious entrepreneur, if the legislation in one country or one market is not okay, he'll just move to another market, right? And for far stupider reasons than like copyright or whatever, like even for, how you can establish a company, how you can financing, how you can grow that company, etc., are already reasons that an entrepreneur will jump. Now, that means, of course, we have a significant number of people going other places and running those businesses other places. The only downside I see is, that potentially somebody who would have a creative idea that might be realized with a better law, we are losing a tiny fractions of those ideas. So, if somebody, is afraid, like the Germans apparently are afraid of their laws, right? But has a brilliant business idea that's not doable, maybe they will hesitate to execute it, and if the proper law would be there. But that's a tiny fraction, because most entrepreneurs, like Marko said, they don't care. The only thing is speed and where you can actually do it. Like, for me, that was one of the hard lessons of my MBA studies, is that corporations basically don't oblige the law until the government makes them, right? So, and that's the economically feasible thing to do. Now, the funny thing is that if someone, then entrepreneurs, when they're starting, should be allowed to say something like that, but they never say that, right? So it's like, the corporations are fine for pushing the boundaries of how much they can stretch the law, but, German entrepreneurs want to be by the book from day number one. And, Slovenian entrepreneurs also sometimes do that. So the second group that is going to be far more worse off with this law or set of laws gets passed in the wrong way would be the consumers, right? We mentioned, Netflix not being, and all the other stuff. That's just a shame, because we as a consumer would be, worse off. We'll have less selection, we'll have less whatever. But the group that's going to be the most worse off is the society itself, because one of the best so all of these things that we're talking today contribute to, let's call them the types of jobs and the types of experiences that are more unlikely to get robotized or taken away, right? So if you are running a startup that produces content, it's going to take some time before robots can start producing content effectively. So, having the ability to start businesses like that also increases the chance of, future-proof jobs staying in that country. And that thing is the biggest problem with all of these things.
So entrepreneurs will adjust.
Sure.
Bigger companies probably will try to adjust system more effectively than citizens and consumers. But what can citizens and consumers do? Matthias, do you have any idea?
Well, I will actually go back to say that I don't think all entrepreneurs get out that well from the deal. What we see is basically, the entire torrent scene in Europe is run by entrepreneurs, but it's all illegal because of the copyright regime. And they've been doing fairly well until recent year, when big industry has basically pushed the EU to crack down, follow the money principle, basically throwing entrepreneurs in jail for breaking the law. So the problem here is if the law don't adapt to new practices. Normally it would, and then it won't be a problem. Entrepreneurs develop something new, we realize it's good for society, we adapt the law. When that doesn't happen, we create problems for entrepreneurs. And here, the problem with European harmonization here would be that you run out of places to move to unless you want to move out of the European market entirely, which I think a lot of people will do. And the problem, if you go back to lobbying in the EU, the ones who do lobby are the big business. They have the money to hire someone to lobby full time. The entrepreneurs are too busy, doing their startup scene. There's a few NGOs for them that lobby on their behalf, but generally they have nowhere near as much influence as the big industry. Everyone loves to talk about small and medium-sized enterprises in the EU, but we don't talk with them. We talk with the big industry, and they will tell us what is good for the small and medium-sized enterprises, and the legislators will follow that. But on the question of citizens, what they have to do is get politically active. I mean, that being political myself, that's the only message. You can't sit and wait for someone else to solve your problems. If you disagree with how the law is being made, you have to get in the political discussion one way or another. And when it comes to academia, I think there is a change. When I started following the copyright discussions, all academia said that the current regime is crazy, the change will probably be for the worse, we will do nothing about it. And now, some 10 years later, I see more and more copyright academia saying we need to get into the political discussion, we need to provide evidence for policymakers why the proposals aren't good. So there is a change from academia points of view, how they interact with the legislators, at least on the European level.
Which are the...
Academia, you mean law, legal academia?
No, not just legal.
Any kind of...
Yeah. Like 15 years ago, when we would have a panel of, I talk about legal profession, professors from United States and professors from Europe. Professors from United States would talk, we need to change that, we need to do this and this, and the European professors would say, TRIPS, that's a trade-related aspect of intellectual property right, huge international convention. TRIPS says this and this, so we can't do anything. So that's definitely changing now in Europe as well. Which are the problematic areas from the digital single market, or which legislation, according to your opinion, would force the most small businesses to move somewhere else from Europe? Which are these, like text and data mining in the copyright directive may be one reason. Other topics?
Well, I don't think there's any single piece of legislation. I mean, because there's not one single set of small businesses. So every single one of these legislations will, if done incorrectly, will push out a small fragment of entrepreneurs.
Okay, don't name the pieces of legislation, name the topics.
Well, it would be, I mean, the free flow of data initiative. If that isn't done correctly, we will lose business.
What's the problem?
Well, the problem is it's supposed to create a free flow of data, but if it creates too much legal uncertainty about how that data can be moved, or if it's not properly implemented in some member states, businesses might fall between the cracks. When you have the net neutrality, if the specialized services that are being allowed, if that is interpreted, if the interpretation changed, you might have businesses created around specialized services that suddenly realize that they're not covered by that exception. That would cause a problem. I mean, every single piece of legislation, legal uncertainty is always a problem for businesses. And the problem here is that we will be stuck with legal uncertainty for years because there's so many different legal files ongoing. So even if you think that your problem is only the copyright legislation, you might end up 3 years from now realizing, no, it was the digital content, online sales of digital content. That is what I should have been worried about, because that will actually define my terms of services with my consumers. So my business model doesn't work because of that legislation.
Dušan, can you add something else that would be like really problematic for small companies? Entrepreneurs.
Actually, I can add a case from Slovenia, a recent case. We have witnessed the problem of the media companies, the leading media companies. They are losing advertising incomes, and that's one of the, I mean, this is the result of the opening up the market. So the foreign companies who are providing content in Slovenia, and this is the same is happening in Estonia, for example. The advertisers go to these foreign companies, and Slovenian media companies are losing incomes. So they cannot create their own content anymore because they don't have enough income. And that's a problem. So we have to be really aware how to shape the legislation. So Estonia now is proposing changes to the Audiovisual Media Service Directive, which is open up for changes. And I think that Slovenia should also take care about this because this is a problem of small countries. And then we have also other issues which are more forward-looking, like platforms. The services will change, the applications will change in the future. And the monopoly will form, new monopolies will form, content aggregators. So if we don't, let's say, form right, or if you don't have the right directives, legislation in place, small companies may face problems, and we will end up with huge monopolies like Google and Amazon, Facebook. So we have to shape the future now, and we should do this through the transparent and open process by involving all the key stakeholders. I think that's very important.
Julia, how will landscape on digital single market look in 2 years, or maybe in 5?
I think, yes, in 2 years, not that much will have changed. Because out of all the different legislative initiatives that have been presented by this Commission since 2014, I think maybe 2 or 3 have actually been voted on. Everything else is still in the pipeline. And even the ones that have been voted on usually then need to be implemented into national law. And so I don't think that very much will have changed legally in the next 2 years, but of course a lot will have changed technologically. And I think the most abrupt changes actually don't happen through the legislation. They happen either through technological progress, or they sometimes happen through court cases. So, for example, the European Court of Justice is currently deliberating the question whether Uber is an internet service or a transport company. And this decision will be made one day to the other. And depending on what the court is going to decide, this is going to have a significant impact on the business model of Uber. And you can argue for either side. You can say that it would be a good thing if the court says it's a transport company because this will mean better protection for the drivers and so on. But the point is, regardless of how the court decides, the repercussions for other collaborative economy platforms may be significant. So if Uber is a transport company, does that mean that Airbnb is a hotel company? We don't know. So I think it's much more likely for a drastic change to happen because of a court ruling that sometimes takes extremely black and white decisions on certain questions that are open, whereas in the legislative process there tends to be kind of a mediation, and the change is very gradual and very slow.
Marko, are you optimistic about Europe being more similar to other parts of the world, or more different, more business friendly, more citizens friendly, more consumer friendly, or?
No, I'm optimistic always. This question was before interesting. What will be in like 5 years, right? Or maybe 5 to 10, right? Sorry? Microphone. So most likely there will be autonomous driving, there will be flying things, there will be many more devices around and so on. So this is something which is already there, it's just the question when it will come into the consumer market. So now we are discussing about what was like a couple of years ago, right? So there will be new challenges to be regulated as well, which will be maybe even more challenging. Uber is the past, Okay, it's taxi, non-taxi company, who cares really, right? I mean, if this would be, I don't know, European company instead of US, discussion would be probably easier, but okay, I don't care. So there will be more challenges, right? And you are really legal people, right? So if the law is not realistic, you cannot implement it, right? So, I would guess that you will have to find the balance between technology, speed, and friendliness toward consumers. In the end, people probably won't suffer that much. I mean, it could be that there will be industry sectors which will suffer, but not because of legal aspects, but because they are maybe just lagging behind. For instance, discussion about Uber is also in Slovenia, right? So at the same time, you know, this is this platform economy, a collaborative economy, nice. But there are a couple of other things which where, let's say, farmers are extremely happy about these developments, you know. They don't care, you know, not about Uber, about developments in their sector, right? Uber, okay, taxi drivers, they want to keep monopoly everywhere, you know, Paris, the worst, right? But so legal aspect can only
quite dramatically on the end of the day. Not my point being, I don't want that we think that like law is something that's like completely separate or something like that. But legal system shapes the life of individuals and companies and everyone else. So it's for citizens, for entrepreneurs, and for everybody else. It's kind of important to know what's going on. It would be useful and to have knowledge and to try to influence and maybe to be able to enforce something that we would avoid, like the most pressing disaster in the future. And that's discussion.
No, sure. I agree with you. It's just I'm just going back to this my very first comment where I see this desynchronization between speed of development, technology.
It's always. Law is always lagging behind, and legal law is never as quick as technology. Technology is always at war with law, and law is like lagging behind, and it's always out of date. But this probably does not mean that we should not care about good law, to have like the good environment to making business, to research, to have rights for citizens, and to have a functioning economy and life in general. Tilen wanted to ask a question to Mattias, like 5 questions before, and so go ahead and ask him, and then I will give you a word also because you want to add something.
Entrepreneurs are all about, you know, figuring stuff out as quickly as possible and then acting on it. And, you know, I was really inspired by your answer, you know, get politically active. So I have 2 tactical questions for you now, which maybe will help people in here and those listening online be more politically active. The first one is, you know, as a startup entrepreneur, you always have to choose your battles because your resources are limited. So the question is, you know, which battle to choose from the battles we mentioned? That's the first question. You know, which one you think will have the most impact, or which one, you know, because, you know, if you are talking to a politician, you have 3 minutes. You have to convey one idea. If you convey 2 at the same time, you're going to lose them, and then nothing will be of purpose. And the second one is, what do you do if you sense that there's a lot of know-how about this kind of topics in a political party that's not really a political party you identify with? You know, what do you do in this case? So, you know, a political party you generally don't agree with has the best ideas on those topics. What do you do in this case?
These are 2 excellent questions, and when Mattias is going to answer and comment, then we will ask you whether you have any interesting question.
Okay, I'll go backwards because it's easier for me. So if one party has ideas you agree with, but you don't generally agree with the party, you should go to other parties and shame them for not having the same policy in that area. Basically, go to the party you would generally agree with, say, how come you're so lame on this? Even that party that is horrible have grasped this topic and you're lagging behind. And basically commute to them that your loyalty with the party you do agree with basically depends on them adapting. That would be it might work, it might not work, but that would be my best strategy. I wouldn't, swallow the sour medicine and go with the horrible party. That would not be my answer. Your first question, one word that will... Oh yeah, so that of course entirely depends on what you're doing, what your business model is, what you're working with. So I can't say this is the one law that all entrepreneurs should be worried about. It depends entirely on what you're working with. But what I can tell you is that those 3 minutes will be totally useless unless you've spent half an hour to figure out who to talk to. So the interesting thing with digital policy is that it's still very few politicians working with it. And that means that the politicians that do work with it has relatively large influence. So if you find out which member of a political party is writing their digital policy, you can affect the entire party by changing the mind of that person. That is how few people are involved, especially in a smaller country. Every party will have a group of, I would say, less than 10 people working on digital policy. If you can identify them and then talk to them about your problems instead of going to your closest local member of the party. That would work in other topics because, for social policy or tax policy, almost everyone in any party would have some sort of inclination of what you're talking about. When it comes to digital policy, they will always say, that's the guy you need to talk to. So figure out who you need to talk to. Also in the European scene, figure out who is involved in the file. Don't get stuck with talking to Slovenian members of parliament if they're not working with it. Go to a German member or a French member or whoever. Just identify which are the key players in this file, because same thing there. In the political groups in the European Parliament, there will be a handful of people involved in every file, and they will have huge sway over their groups. So identify which politicians to talk to. Don't waste your time on talking to everyone. Just find the key ones.
Okay, so the audience, we expect some very, very interesting questions. So who is going to be first? You can also ask in Slovenian and we'll translate. And please tell your name as well.
Okay, so I am Tadej Andolšak. My question is, several of you mentioned that in the European Council, single countries can block pieces of legislation, and I want to know how. As to my understanding, double majority is needed to pass legislation, but even with that, any country could be outvoted. What kind of a pressure can they exert on others to get their way?
So a member country was outvoted recently. It was Poland. Any member can be outvoted at any given time, and that means that no member wants to do that to another member because they could be next. So even though there is a majority or double majority mechanism in the council, they take great pains to find compromises that everyone can agree with, and then they will not vote, and then they will just all support that position. And then externally they will say, this is not what we wanted, but whatever comes out of the council generally has some kind of blessing from every member state, because they never want to vote down a member of the council, because then they might be the next member to vote it down on another topic that is important to them. So that is why a single member, by making too much noise, especially if it's a larger member, can basically block a topic. A small member, normally they cave sooner or later in internal discussions in the council, because they realize if they push too far, they might actually get voted down. The larger member states rarely fear that scenario, so they are more self-assured in their negotiation position. And that is why a single member can block.
Just to add to that, especially on digital policy, but also in some other fields, the member states tend to form groups. So in the same way that you have fractions in the parliament, you have some different groups in the council. So for example, on digital policy, you have the so-called group of like-minded countries. These are the countries who are generally a bit more progressive on digital policies, and especially are very kind of pro-free market, and they used to be led by the United Kingdom, but now they're not really leading anything anymore, and so it's a bit more kind of the Scandinavian and Baltic countries, and you always have a very strong alliance between Germany and France, at least on a lot of topics. On digital, definitely they work together very much. And if you have basically the two largest countries more or less saying the same thing, then it's extremely difficult to go against them, because basically you will need everybody to pull together. So this is also one of the reasons why it's extremely difficult, even if only one country is really opposed to something. If it's Germany or France, then it gets very difficult.
Another question?
Hello. I have a question actually for Tilen. Would you mind commenting on the situation in Slovenia? I've noticed, I mean, you started your business in Slovenia, and somehow you have all these different startups and all these different projects working in UK nowadays. And I would like to ask you why. What are the reasons, and is Slovenia just too small, or is it this regulatory concept, or?
Yeah, okay. It's a bit off topic, but I'll try to make it on topic as possible. So, why the UK? Basically, we accidentally stumbled upon our first UK customer, which opened our eyes to the possibilities that lie there, and then how I'm tying this into this topic is. Again, back to the laws, right? The UK law, the Anglo-Saxon law, is much more friendly or developed towards companies that require quick and painless equity manipulation. So, giving out shares, buying shares back, investing and stuff like that. So the whole investment scene is more developed in the UK, relatively to Slovenia. Or it used to be that back in 2009, 2010. And the second reason, it's not really tied to this circle, is UK being more advanced, such as Berlin also, like being the second startup hub now, the amount of what we call business-heavy startups, so startups who are founded by people who only have business background and no technical skill, so those are much more frequent in the UK or in Berlin, and actually in any big city. Because in Ljubljana or in Slovenia, it's general. If you talk to 10 startups, I would say 9 out of them have technical capability built in from day one, and it's pretty much the other way around in London. So that's why.
Any other question? So shall we start like the last message for the audience here and online from the mouth of politicians, researchers, digital champions, entrepreneurs, researchers who are also like doing as experts in the forums of NGOs and stuff like that. Who will start first? Shall we give word to Marko and then to Tilen? And Dušan, and then Julia and Mattias for the end.
Maybe before I sounded too not so optimistic, just I would like to emphasize now a bit of this optimism. So just a couple of short points. So apparently recently the European Parliament suggested the European Commission to make agency for robotics and AI, for instance. This is something which I think it's a good move. So this is, I was just discussing with Commission people which are now considering maybe to do it or not to do it. Yeah, so apparently it's in the process. And we Slovenians, we are, by the way, we offered to host this agency. So this is one thing, right? Sorry? No, it was a friendly offer, nothing else. the other thing, right? So we discussed here about this digitalization, and this digitalization is really changing lives in many also unpredictable ways. What's a good message, right? So when we talk about internet, and this includes most of these topics which we touched, internet functions because of lots of trust, right? So, I mean, it happens, this virus here and there, some cyber attacks and so on, but basically it operates on trust. So there's probably 99+% trust, and then here and there would be some troubles here and there. If there wouldn't be any trust, then nobody would pay with a credit card, with that and that and that. So it's just, so everybody knows, everybody's collecting data about everybody. Mostly nobody's analyzing them, right? It's just by default they're collected. You cannot avoid it even. So good messages, trust is there, right? And your question before was how things will evolve. Probably this trust will remain. I mean, there are these cyber attacks, there are a couple of other things which actually don't change much. All benefiting out of it. But there are these couple of points which I am afraid of, which probably you as a parliament should deal with. Let's say, introducing technology into autonomous weapons. I think this is maybe one of the biggest dangers which I see, not autonomous cars, probably they will make mistakes, but autonomous weapons are more complicated, I think, right? So this is something where it's not a joke anymore. And this privacy is also something which, so at the beginning when I said I can in principle buy data about all of us for a small amount of money, this is true. And internet is not just European or just Slovenian or just German business, but it's global business. So even if we protect Europe, this won't hold for Chinese, for Russians, for Americans, for anybody else. So we need to think about internet as a global business, right?
And you're talking about legal purchases or purchases on black market?
Legal. Even Slovenian companies do this because there's no other way. Yeah, of course, you pay a bit of money and well. This is normal thing, I'm maybe just surprised for you, but everybody knows this, and probably Tilen knows this. Right?
No, we are aware of that. We are like, when we are advising to companies from Europe who want to do that, we send them to United States.
Yeah. But this is like, it's not a real solution to the problem, right? Sending them away. Right? So still, at the end, data is collected anyway. So these are a couple of dangers. So this privacy can have significant impact also in the future because everybody's tracked, I mean, in one or the other way, in friendly way or unfriendly way. And these unfriendly ways, I don't know, I don't see them too many yet, but it may be that this will evolve in something which we won't like. At the moment, I'm not afraid yet, but so autonomous weapons and privacy in the future, these are two things where I would be afraid. On the positive side, still we need to say, well, trust is running the whole thing.
Okay, thank you. Tilen, your message.
I'm going to be extremely short. My message to all Slovenians is live your life as intentionally as possible, because we are severely lacking that.
Great. Dušan?
Well, I'm not afraid of the autonomous weapons, but of tracking. And we should change probably the legislation so that Marko couldn't import our data from the United States. So that's my...
I would do them there, right?
Yeah, okay. Well, my message, I'm an optimist, but I know that we have to fight for our future. As mentioned before, there are many opportunities ahead of us in the digital single market. But my main message probably is that we should build trust, not only regarding the privacy, but also regarding citizens buying online in Europe. In recent research, we have seen that there is no trust among citizens. They don't trust when buying online. They don't trust this trust is different in different countries. So we have to address this at the EU level, broader, and also in countries, in the member states. But that's for sure very important. And then coming from the telecom single market, it is very important that we don't allow huge monopolies to be created. We have to keep with the current competition legislation and don't follow the interests of the big players which try to water down the rules. For example, in the mobile market, we have witnessed how this influences the market. In Austria, for example, the prices rise up, and also in some other countries. So we have to be very careful in all these areas. It's not only the digital single market; it's also like the competition legislation and other areas as well.
And Mattias and Julia. Mattias first.
I think you should all be aware of that. Digitalization is one of the biggest changes of society, and it's changing a lot of things outside the scope of internet. I think the very fundamental what a nation state is will be questioned through digitalization over the time. We care more about people in other countries than we've ever done before. We interact more with them. And the notion that every nation manage their own business will basically pass away over time. I don't think our children will buy it. And from that point of view, the European digital single market is not the end. I mean, we need it, but we need it as a stepping stone for a global digital single market. If the problem is that we have a different regime on data protection in Europe and the US, the solution cannot be we can't solve that. The solution is to have a dialogue and to create a global regime that everyone can accept. That's the only future-proof solution to that problem. And I think we will end there, but it will take a lot of time and a lot of work, and we need more people to do that work. And I think if we want the right set of regimes to end up, we have to really think about it now and not wait until the rest of the world has become more advanced in the digitalization than Europe.
Julia?
Yeah, competition between companies, I think, is extremely important. Competition between countries is not always so good. And I mean, the problem that we have today is basically, on the one hand, it's important and good for businesses that they can move to the country where they find a good regulatory environment. But on the other hand, there are also certain business models that we would like to ban or that we would not want to see, especially when it comes to the exploitation of personal data, for example. And of course, if you don't have common rules, there's always going to be competition down to the lowest denominator. You really see this with tax law. We have tax havens in the middle of the European Union that are ultimately harmful for everybody, because if every country is trying to be lower than their neighbor, then the end result is that we don't have any money for public services. So we need common European rules and indeed at a later stage global rules, because otherwise it's the public interest that is going to be suffering. And the second point, I think we've talked a lot about economic policies, but all of these economic policies, especially on digital, have a direct impact on fundamental rights. And what we're missing is really a stronger voice for the protection of fundamental rights when the decisions are being made at a European level. We have very strong civil society groups in the member states who are sometimes then fighting with their governments when they try to implement the legislation at a national level. But then, in a way, it's already too late, because the governments can say, we're very sorry, it's evil Brussels that is making us do that, when, in fact, they were sitting in the council and weren't doing anything against it when the decisions were being made. So it's really important, especially for kind of civil rights organizations, to be active in the European policy process and follow what is being discussed right now in Brussels.
It's an excellent ending, so let's sum up with this. Tilen said, let's live intensively as possible. Intentionally, I understood intensively. I would add, like, we should take care about our future and actively influence the future and take care of a good environment, and the human rights are actually a very important issue in this global picture. But I hope that you saw or listened this very carefully and will take home the most important thing that you find important and act on them. So thank you very much for the panel. Thank you for our agreements and disagreements, and I hope the debate will continue when we'll put the mics down. Thank you very much.